For over a century, men walked along narrow planks atop moving freight trains, and then one day the railroads tore those walkways off every boxcar in America. Why? A roof walk, sometimes called a running board, was never just a nostalgic detail or a set piece from old railroad films. It was a narrow, exposed walkway running the full length of a boxcar's roof, sometimes no wider than 8 inches, sometimes a foot, but always perched high above the rails. Early versions were little more than wooden planks, bolted directly to the steel ribs of the car, worn smooth by boots and weather. By the 1930s, steel-reinforced running boards replaced simple wood, with cleats or slats spaced every foot or so to give a brakeman's boot some hope of grip. These boards were anchored by heavy steel cleats, their surfaces slick in rain or ice, their edges set back just enough to keep a man from falling off with a careless step, at least in theory. At one end of every boxcar, rising above the roofline, stood the tall handbrake wheel. This was no small lever or hidden mechanism. It was a spoked iron wheel mounted on a vertical rod that often extended nearly 2 feet above the car's highest point. The wheel's position was deliberate, placed at the very end of the car. It could only be reached by climbing the ladder at the car's corner, stepping onto the roof walk, and then moving out across the roof itself. The height was not a matter of convenience, but necessity. The brake's mechanism, linked by rods and chains to the car's brake shoes, required leverage, and that meant the wheel had to be large and set high, out of easy reach from the ground or even the end platform. For a brakeman, the roof walk was both a path and a workspace. The job demanded that he cross from car to car, sometimes at speed, always with the wind pressing at his back or face to reach the brake wheel. Once there, he would grip the iron rim, sometimes using a wooden brake club for extra force, and turn the wheel to tighten the chain and set the brake. A retainer lever close at hand would lock the brake in place, holding the tension even after the wheel was released. Only then would the brakeman step back onto the running board and move to the next car, repeating the process as the train rumbled beneath him. The entire layout of the boxcar, its ladders, its roof walk, and its high brake wheel was designed around this manual labor. It was not built for comfort or safety, but for the simple, mechanical fact that every car needed its own brake set by hand. The running board was a tool, not a luxury, and its presence on nearly every American boxcar for almost a century tells a story of necessity, risk, and the stubborn persistence of old ways in the face of progress. Brakemen became the living link between machine and momentum. Their work began with a climb, one hand gripping the cold rung of a side ladder, the other steadying against the steel skin of the boxcar. Boots found the first cleat of the running board, and from there, the only path was forward, across a roof that shuddered and flexed with every joint in the rails. At 30 miles an hour, the roof walk was not a platform, but a test of balance, judgment, and nerve. The job was not a daredevil's act. It was a craft, learned by repetition and refined by necessity. Every car in the train, sometimes 40 or 50 in a row, carried its own tall handbrake wheel at the end of the roof. The brakeman's duty was to reach each wheel, sometimes while the train was rolling, sometimes in the dead of night, and turn it with deliberate force. The iron rim, cold in winter and burning in summer, demanded a steady grip. Some men used a brake club, a length of hardwood or pipe, to gain extra leverage when the wheel refused to budge. The chain tightened, the brake shoes pressed against the wheels below, and the retainer lever snapped into place, holding the tension until the engineer called for release. This process, climbing, crossing, setting brakes, adjusting retainers, was the backbone of daily railroading. Rulebooks spelled it out in plain language: the brakeman shall climb onto the roof walk, locate the handbrake, and secure the retainer before moving on. No drama, just instruction. Yet every step across the running board was a calculated risk. The roof walk was never a decorative flourish. It was a tool, essential for the workflow, designed into every car by engineers who knew that the train could not be controlled without men above. Brakemen learned to read the rhythm of the rails through their feet. They memorized the spacing of cleats, the flex of the roof, the way a gust of wind could catch a coat and pull a man sideways. Apprenticeship manuals from the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen describe the roof walk as a proving ground, a place where balance, agility, and grip meant the difference between a job well done and a slip that could end a career. The culture of the railroad made these routines second nature. Crews developed signals, whistle blasts, lantern waves, shouted warnings that synchronized the work across a moving chain of steel and wood. Every day, thousands of men performed these tasks without fanfare. They became experts in the choreography of risk, moving from car to car as the countryside sped by below. The roof walk was their path, and the work they did atop it was not a spectacle, but a skilled profession, woven into the fabric of American railroading for nearly a century. A boxcar roof was never a true platform. Its surface curved gently from side to side, forming a rounded crown of steel or wood that offered almost no level ground. Brakemen crossed this arc, not in sunlight and stillness, but as the train lurched and swayed beneath them, every vibration traveling up through their boots. The running board, that narrow strip bolted along the roof's length, was supposed to be a path. In reality, it was a slender margin between balance and a deadly fall. Even in dry weather, the roof's painted metal could turn slick with condensation or oil. Rain transformed it into a slide. In winter, ice glazed every cleat and seam, erasing the difference between safety and disaster. Frost would build up overnight, and by morning, a single, careless step could send a man skidding toward the edge. The wind, always present on a moving train, pressed against the body with invisible force. At 30 or 40 miles an hour, a gust could catch a coat or cap and tip a man off balance. Crossing between cars meant timing a leap as the couplers flexed and the roofs shifted out of alignment. Every joint in the rails sent a jolt through the car, enough to stagger even an experienced brakeman. The boxcar's load below added another layer of risk. Freight could settle unevenly, causing the roof to flex and sag in unpredictable places. Boards might creak underfoot, and a hidden gap between the cargo and the roof could let the metal bow downward with a sudden drop. Brakemen learned to test each step, searching for solid footing where none was guaranteed. The running board itself, though reinforced with steel cleats, was only a few inches wide, sometimes less than the length of a boot. There were no rails, no harness, nothing to catch a man if he slipped. The consequences of a fall were immediate and final. A drop from the roof meant not just hitting the ground, but landing in the narrow canyon between moving cars. The wheels, each weighing hundreds of pounds, spun inches away. A man who lost his footing rarely landed clear of the train. Most were struck by the wheels or crushed by the undercarriage before he could even attempt to scramble free. The sheer momentum of a moving freight train left no margin for error. For every successful crossing, there was the knowledge, unspoken but understood, that one misstep could end a life in seconds. This was the reality of rooftop work, exposed, unstable, and always a breath away from tragedy. 100 feet before every tunnel or low bridge, a strange curtain waited in the wind, a row of ropes dangling across the tracks, swaying in the slipstream of the oncoming train. These were telltales, and for brakemen on the roof, they were the difference between life and sudden death. The ropes hung low, spaced just a few inches apart, forming a swinging barrier that brushed a man's face or shoulders as the train approached danger. Their message was blunt: duck now, or be swept from the car by stone or steel. Telltales did not prevent danger. A brakeman, moving fast along the roof walk, learned to trust the sting of rope against his cheek as the last signal to flatten himself on the curved metal or scramble down a ladder. The ropes were installed by rule, 6 inches below the lowest clearance and at least 100 feet ahead of any tunnel or bridge. Old manuals describe them as a necessary warning for men working atop moving cars. Over time, telltales became as much a part of the railroad landscape as whistles and lanterns. They hung in every region, through rain and snow, sometimes replaced by chains in hard-wearing districts. But their presence was a silent admission. Nothing else stood between a brakeman and a fatal collision, except a few strands of rope and his own reflexes. The system depended not on prevention, but on a moment's warning, a brush of hemp, a split second to react. On the rails, safety was measured in heartbeats and inches, and the telltale was the only line separating routine from disaster. It was a daily reminder that working the roof was always a gamble, and the house never blinked. Railroad accident records, preserved in government archives and union files, speak with a kind of blunt finality. The Interstate Commerce Commission's reports, stamped and filed year after year, list the same cause with chilling regularity: falls from the roof walk. In December 1917, Frank C. Winecup, a brakeman for the Salt Lake Railway, lost his grip on a rain-soaked boxcar roof near Vermont, California. The Needles Nugget described how he was thrown from the moving train and killed instantly, leaving behind a family and a job that demanded everything. The same story played out across the country. In Pennsylvania, December 1923, William J. Jordan, head brakeman for the Pennsylvania Railroad, died when his train derailed. The ICC report notes he was thrown from the roof as the car left the rails. Local newspapers ran the story briefly, but the records kept growing. The McLean County Museum of History's ledger lists railroad fatalities in spare, unembellished lines: fell from roof walk, struck by bridge, slipped while setting brake. Dozens of names fill the pages from the 1910s through the 1950s. Some entries are matched with Union death benefit files, often reduced to railroad accident as the only explanation. The Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen's newsletters sometimes included memorials, but more often, a single line in the minutes marked the loss: Brother X lost in service, roof walk fall. Newspaper archives fill in what official records miss. The Winona and St. Peter Railroad reported a brakeman who slipped between cars while climbing atop a boxcar. His death described as instant. In the West, small-town papers recorded men swept from roofs during storms or crushed after missing a step in the dark. In 1942, the Denver Post reported a brakeman killed on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe after slipping on an icy running board. The details shift, but the cause repeats. The roof walk, a narrow, exposed path, became a familiar line in the story of railroading's cost. The scale of loss was measured not by a single disaster, but by a steady, relentless toll. Many deaths never appeared in federal logs, especially those in remote yards or small towns. Union records and local news together reveal a pattern that was constant, not rare. For every name recorded, others are lost to missing files and forgotten ledgers. The Roofwalks legacy is written in these fragments: case files, accident reports, obituary columns, each one evidence of a danger that was part of daily life for generations of railroad workers. George Westinghouse was not a railroad man by birth, but an inventor with a stubborn sense of possibility. In 1869, he filed a patent that would forever change how trains stopped, a system that replaced muscle and nerve with air and steel. The Westinghouse AIR brake, as it came to be known, was built around a simple but radical idea. Instead of sending men along the roofs to set brakes by hand, The engineer could stop the entire train with a single movement inside the locomotive cab. The core of the invention was a continuous pipe running the length of the train, charged with compressed air. Each car was fitted with a brake cylinder and a device called a triple valve. When the engineer moved a lever in the cab, the air pressure in the pipe dropped. Instantly, every valve along the line responded, forcing brake shoes against the wheels of every car at once. The effect was immediate, a coordinated train-wide application of brakes, impossible to achieve with hand wheels alone. Westinghouse's 1869 patent, number 88,929, spelled out the details: a cab valve, a main pipe, and a fail-safe design that would automatically set the brakes if the pipe was ruptured or disconnected. This was not just an improvement in stopping power, it was a shift in control. The engineer, once dependent on the scattered efforts of brakemen scrambling along the roof walks, now held command over the entire train from behind the throttle. The air brake made it possible to run longer, heavier trains at higher speeds, with a margin of safety unthinkable in the era of manual brakes. Early demonstrations of the system drew crowds. In 1869, a Westinghouse-equipped train was brought to a halt within a few car lengths, something that could not be done by even the most skilled crew working the roof. Trade journals and railroad officials watched as the brakes hissed to life, each car responding in perfect unison. The technical press of the day reported the feat with a sense of awe, and adoption spread quickly among the major railroads. In theory, this new technology should have ended the rooftop run forever. The running board and high brake wheel, those grim fixtures of the boxcar roof, were no longer needed for routine operation. The engineer's hand on the cab valve replaced the brakeman's dash across the windswept cars. The air brake was the technological answer to the roof walk problem, offering a clear path away from the daily peril that defined a brakeman's work. Yet while the mechanism was ready, the world atop the boxcars did not change overnight. The air brake's logic was clean and absolute. One lever in the cab, one action, all brakes set. The reality on the rails would prove slower, tangled in habit, equipment, and the weight of tradition. But the invention itself provided the first true escape from the deadly arithmetic of the roof walk, a promise of safety sealed in steel and compressed air, waiting for the rest of the industry to catch up. Boxcar roofs kept their running boards long after the AIR brake's promise of safety echoed through the industry. The rails of America stretched across mountains and plains, but the pace of change moved at a crawl. For every new car fitted with Westinghouse's invention, dozens of older boxcars remained in service, unchanged, their roofs still bristling with planks and steel cleats. Railroads operated on a scale that defied easy overhaul. By the 1930s, more than 500,000 freight cars rolled across the country, many built before air brakes were even standard. The cost of stripping every roof walk, lowering every brake wheel, and refitting the fleet ran into the millions, a figure that made management hesitate, especially during lean years. Rules and customs proved just as stubborn as hardware. Operating manuals from the Baltimore and Ohio, the Southern Pacific, and nearly every major line spelled out the same instructions. The brakeman shall climb the ladder, walk the running board, and set the handbrake. Even as air brakes became more reliable, company rulebooks kept the old procedures alive, especially in mountainous regions where a manual retainer might be needed if the air system failed. Railroad culture treated the roof walk as a rite of passage, a test of nerve and skill passed down from veteran to apprentice. Crews measured themselves by how quickly and confidently they could cross a swaying train at speed. To refuse the roof was to risk a reputation for weakness, or worse, insubordination. Union newsletters from the 1950s and the 1960s defended the practice, insisting that the roof walk was a safety device, not a hazard, and warning that its removal would threaten thousands of brakeman jobs. The inertia was not just emotional or procedural. Retrofitting a single boxcar, removing the roof walk, cutting down ladders, and installing a low-mounted handbrake cost up to $2,000 in the early 1970s. Multiply that by the tens of thousands of cars still in service, and the price tag ballooned. Many railroads chose to run old equipment to the end of its useful life rather than absorb the cost of modernization. In the meantime, the danger persisted. Brakemen kept crossing the roofs, setting brakes by hand, and trusting their balance and reflexes against the wind and the rails. The system changed slowly, not because the danger was hidden, but because the weight of tradition, economics, and sheer logistical scale held the old ways in place. For decades after the air brake's arrival, the roof walk remained, a stubborn relic of a time when every stop depended on a man's grip and a narrow path high above the tracks. Official records from the late 1950s and early 1960s began to fill with the language of risk and reform. Minutes from the Association of American Railroads Mechanical Division meetings show engineers and safety officers cataloging the dangers of roof walks in painstaking detail: slips on wet metal, men swept from cars in winter storms, and the impossibility of safe footing at speed. The Interstate Commerce Commission, already tracking accident statistics, started to circulate internal memos urging a review of the entire system. Their files grew thick with testimony: union representatives citing deaths and injuries, safety advocates presenting charts of fatalities, and railroad executives weighing the cost of retrofitting against the price of another lost brakeman. By 1964, the ICC had issued an advisory that called for the phase-out of high-mounted brake wheels and running boards on new boxcars. The recommendation was not yet an outright ban, but it pressed the industry to consider alternatives. Safety campaigners, including the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen, submitted letters and data, arguing that no amount of skill or caution could make the roof walk safe. They pointed to the steady toll, fatalities that no longer shocked because they had become routine. Yet the conversation was far from one-sided. Railroad management and some union voices pushed back, insisting that the roof walk still had a place in emergencies. If an air brake failed on a mountain grade, a brakeman might need to reach the manual retainer. In rare cases, manual access was still the last line of defense. The debate moved from the yard to the hearing room. ICC transcripts document hours of argument, safety engineers reading from accident reports, union leaders warning of job losses, and railroad attorneys defending the old procedures. There was no single moment of decision, only a mounting accumulation of evidence, a stack of reports and recommendations that made the continued use of roof walks harder to justify. The momentum was shifting. Each new advisory, each set of minutes, each safety bulletin added weight to the case for change. The paper trail grew longer and the pressure built, setting the stage for the language of prohibition that would soon be written into federal law. April 1st, 1966, stands as a dividing line in the story of American railroading, a date written into the official records of the Association of American Railroads and the Interstate Commerce Commission. On that day, the future of the boxcar changed forever. Any freight car ordered after this date would not be built with a roof walk. The rule was absolute. The running board, once a symbol of the brakeman's craft and a silent witness to decades of risk, was no longer allowed on new builds. The regulation went further, setting a second threshold just 6 months later. By October 1st, 1966, no newly delivered freight car could enter service with a roof walk. The language was unambiguous. No exceptions, no grace period. For the first time, the industry was told not how to work around danger, but to erase it from the design itself. The high, exposed brake wheel, once reachable only by climbing to the car's rooftop, was also condemned. Every new boxcar now required a handbrake wheel mounted low, within easy reach from the end platform. This was not a suggestion or a best practice. It was written into federal regulation and AAR mechanical standards, binding on every railroad and every manufacturer. The order spelled the end of a tradition that had shaped the daily lives and deaths of thousands of railroad workers. For nearly a century, the roof walk was as much a part of the boxcar as its steel sides or sliding doors. Now, with a single regulatory stroke, it became a relic. The low-mounted handbrake replaced the old high wheel, letting a crew member set or release the brake from a secure footing without climbing into the wind and darkness. The new standard demanded that the manual brake be as strong and effective as the old design, but it had to be accessible from the ground or the end platform, never again from the roof. This was not a gradual phase-out. For cars ordered after April 1st, 1966 and delivered after October 1st, 1966, the ban was immediate and final. Inspection teams from the Federal Railroad Administration began checking new deliveries for compliance. Any railroad that tried to slip an old-style car into service faced fines and the cost of immediate modification. The industry's technical bulletins and union newsletters from late 1966 and early 1967 echoed the same message. The roof walk era was over for new construction. The running board would never again be part of a forward-looking design. In its place stood a new vision of safety, one that did not require men to risk their lives for the sake of a brake wheel perched above the rails. The reckoning had arrived, not with fanfare, but with the quiet force of a rule book rewritten and a tradition cut off at its root. The 1966 rule set a clear standard for new boxcars, but the transformation of America's freight fleet was anything but immediate. Across the country, older cars still rumbled along, roof walks intact, ladders reaching upward, remnants of an earlier era. Railroads received a 10-year window to clear these features from every boxcar built before the ban. For many, the task was overwhelming. Some fleets dated back to the 1940s or earlier, their steel and timber frames already showing their age. Removing thousands of roof walks overnight would have meant scrapping a huge portion of the fleet, a move that threatened both operations and finances. Faced with this reality, railroads petitioned for more time. Records from 1972 and 1973 reveal major lines like Burlington Northern and Southern Railway pleading for short-term extensions, as a third of their boxcars were already over 30 years old. Each railroad faced a decision: retrofit, retire, or replace. Retrofitting was no simple fix. Crews had to cut away the running boards, shorten ladders, and install new low-hand brakes, each job costing up to $2,000 per car in early 1970s dollars. For cars nearing the end of their service life, retirement made more sense than costly upgrades. Sturdier cars were stripped of their roof walks and fitted with new brake wheels, within reach from the ground. Industry journals estimated that retrofitting 10,000 cars could cost as much as $12 million. By the mid-1970s, the deadline arrived. The change was gradual, not sudden. As fleets cycled through repair shops, roof walks disappeared, ladders were cut down, and the last traces of the old ways faded from the rails. Some freight cars built after the main roof walk ban still carried a narrow walkway on the roof, but these were not a return to the old boxcar practice. Covered hoppers with roof hatches, for example, sometimes required a walkway for loading or inspection while the car was stationary. These surfaces were designed for slow, careful movement, never for crossing at speed, and never for setting brakes on the fly. The difference was more than technical. By the early 1970s, rail operating rules across every major railroad had changed. No employee was allowed to ride on top of any moving equipment, regardless of whether a walkway, hatch, or running board remained. The rulebook's language was blunt. No exceptions, no loopholes for tradition. Any act of crossing a moving roof, even if the surface was there, was now treated as a serious violation, not a badge of skill. The last traces of the old roof walk were stripped of their former meaning. What survived on a handful of cars was a walkway for loading grain or checking a hatch, not a path for a brakeman to risk his life in the wind. The era of the rooftop run was over. Not just by design, but by rule, and by the weight of a new safety culture that saw the old practice as a threat, not a necessity. Today's brake wheel sits low, mounted on the end platform just above the coupler, within arm's reach for a crew member standing safely on solid ground. The wheel itself has barely changed in size or shape, a spoked disc of steel, but its position tells the story of a vanished era, where the old high brake demanded a climb, a rooftop walk, and a test of nerve. The new design offers its grip to anyone with boots on the ballast. The low brake wheel is a quiet survivor, a remnant of a system that once demanded everything from the men who worked it. Its presence is a shadow, a visible trace of the old danger, now transformed into routine safety. The boxcar's roof is bare, unbroken by planks or cleats, the ladders cut short, the sky above no longer a workspace but an empty space. Only the handbrake remains, its function unchanged, but its meaning rewritten. This simple change, lowering a wheel, signals how deeply the industry has changed. The old risks are gone, erased not by spectacle but by design, leaving only the outline of what used to be. The low brake wheel stands as a subtle memorial, a piece of the past, made safe for the present. Today, the roof walk is a ghost, its absence a silent marker of risk, finally banished. Yet every low handbrake and faded bolt scar reminds us, for generations, progress arrived slower than danger retreated. Safety on the rails is never automatic. It is a battle fought in regulation, innovation, and the memory of lives lost on steel and wind. History's deadliest details demand we never take that vigilance for granted. Thanks for traveling this forgotten line.